Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order, and welcome to this, another film review. I actually did a film review just 2 videos ago, wasn't it? Backrooms. Now, this is going to be different because this is a non-roving film review, and I've done a few of those, Tolkien, the Boudica movie, things like that. This is one where I don't go and see it at the cinema. This is a particular film I actually did really want to go and see at the cinema because I've never seen it on the big screen before. Now, this is a film, this is different to most of the films I review. Most of the films I review are new or ones I've never seen before. This is a film I've not only seen before, but I've seen many, many times, probably 100 times or more. I know it very, very well indeed. And I'm talking, of course, about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I want to rewatch this film now. I do. I haven't seen it probably for about a year. I do watch it regularly, but I haven't seen it for about a year. And I want to rewatch it now because, of course, in a couple of days, it's going to be Disclosure Day. And yes, I am doing a video about that. Fear not. Like I wouldn't do a video about Disclosure Day. Yes, I am going to go and watch Disclosure Day. In fact, I was one of the first people in the country to buy a ticket to it. Yes, I've got the first ever showing in the country. Yeah. But what we're going to watch, of course, Close Encounters of the Third Kind was Steven Spielberg's first great UFO movie. And it was released in 1977 to enormous acclaim and enormous popularity. It's much loved by everyone within the UFO community and outside it. And it's kind of like I want to go and see it partly because it is Spielberg's first UFO movie, the one he made. He's made others with a slightly different ET, for example, and War of the Worlds, a sort of alien invasion thing. But this particular one is possibly, not only is this connected in that sense, and I've spoken before about the similarities, the John Williams score, etc. and Spielberg's teamed up with John Williams again. I talked about that in the videos where I reviewed the trailers for Disclosure Day. But also, this could be a sequel to Disclosure Day, and there's several reasons for thinking that, which I will talk about when I've watched the movie, and indeed after I've watched Disclosure Day as well. But I'll know by then, presumably. Now, I wanted to watch this before Disclosure Day. I really, really did. I hope to go and watch it on the big screen, but it's not actually showing anywhere around here. It is showing in a few cinemas. They're doing a Spielberg season, some cinemas because of Disclosure Day. They're doing a run of Spielberg's old movies. So I thought I'll have to watch it at home then. But then I was gonna just watch it, and I thought I was just going to watch it privately. And I thought, why don't I invite you people along, my viewers, and we could make it a kind of non-roving film review. Yeah, reviewing a film I've seen many times. But yeah, I mean, again, reviewing a film I know very well and I've seen many times. What's the point? I know you're all asking me that. Well, the point is that I think every time every time I see something, I do get something new out of it. I spot something I haven't spotted before. And indeed, I may well spot things I've never spotted before because I'm analyzing it in a way I don't normally analyze it. Do you see what I mean? Because this is a movie review. I've never watched it thinking, I've got to do a review, got to make notes and things like that. And I will be making notes when I watch this. Yeah. Now, in order to watch this, I've actually got this... when am I going to on a subject of notes? I've got this here. I want to check if you can see that. This is the Close Encounters DVD collector's edition. I got this in 1997, and there's the back of it. You see there. Oh, I sort of vanish. I sort of I get spirited away by the aliens when I do that. Don't I? Because I still haven't got my green screen extension. Though I'm working on that. I will get that at some point. But that is what I'm going to watch it for. This is like it's high definition. It's a high definition, a widescreen feature. Now, this is very important, and it's the one that Spielberg wanted to make. You see, there are actually 3 versions of this movie. There's the original theatric cut. Then they did a new release with like an extra scene at the end where you see inside the spaceship, and Spielberg was very opposed to that. The studio insisted on it, but Spielberg really didn't want that scene on the inside of the spaceship. And then finally, there's this one. There's this 20th anniversary cut here, which you don't actually see inside the spaceship. Spielberg actually cut that scene out because he always hated it. And so this is like the film he always wanted to make. This is like the director's cut, which is a lot better. The bonus disc has some deleted scenes, but most of those deleted scenes are actually on YouTube. And one in particular is very interesting, which I'll talk about. It refers to the beginning of the film, where there's the scene in the air traffic control, because there's a scene after that which you can actually get on YouTube. But it's on this bonus thing. There's really interesting stuff on here. There's a really interesting interview with Spielberg. And there's some like real special effects they never used and stuff like that. Oh yeah, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to this, to doing watching this again in a very, very serious way. I really, really am. So yeah, I invite you to come along and join me by watching this little review. It's really this non-roving review. Yeah. But before I actually leave you and we go away and do that, I got a little something else I want to show you. I hope you enjoy it.
You know, it's all science fiction rubbish. It's story.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that little funny piece of Steve mumbling there. I've got to thank Neil Ward for creating that meme. It's really, really cool indeed. So, with no further ado, let us begin this non-roving review, shall we? I'll see you at the other end. Well, I've watched the film. I've watched it all. And before we begin, I'd like to inform you that while we were in production of this particular feature, I received word from Neil Ward that he's created another Steve Mumbling funny. Have a watch. Yeah, I've watched the film. I've watched it on this DVD. The version, I'm pleased to say, the version of this film is the best one. Now, there are three versions, three different cuts of Close Encounters available. The first is the original theatrical cut. The second is the one that Spielberg didn't like because it included an extra scene inside the spaceship. So they show you inside the spaceship. And Spielberg was very much against this, but the studio insisted. Spielberg, being a good storyteller, and I'm a storyteller as well, and I understand this, is that a good storyteller knows what not to tell the reader or the viewer. So you know what not to explain. So you're not delivering a lecture and just delivering a pile of information on people. It's a relationship with your reader or viewer. It's a relationship in which you understand the viewer and understand their imagination. You understand the need of what to leave to their imagination. And the interior of the big spaceship was one of them. Not least because the last shot of Roy walking into the spaceship, that's when you last see Roy in the original cut. He turns and he looks and there's lights behind him and the expression on his face and everything is just so good that that ought to be the last time you see Roy. I mean, he shouldn't be actually visible or audible after that. And unfortunately, in this scene, they brought him back and they brought Richard Dreyfuss back and they reshot him like walking up into the spaceship. Then you see the inside of the spaceship. And what happened was, in the end, that was done in the 90s, but afterwards, Steve Spielberg got his way, and there was a final cut of the film in which that particular shot was deleted. You don't see inside the spaceship. There were other actual deleted scenes that I've been watching as well. One of them I'm familiar with because it is in the original cut and it's been left out of this one, which is where Laughlin and Lacan meet in the back of a car, and there's that one. But also, there's a scene which I didn't know about until recently. After the air traffic control scene, when the planes land, one of them, the East Air one, or the Air East one, it's kept on the runway. It's not allowed to go to the terminal, so they just park it on the runway, and then these kind of like CIA people get on board. One of them announces himself as part of the US Air Force Research Laboratory, which of course we all know about, and he smiles and makes an announcement saying, just to let you know, you accidentally passed through a restricted airspace, and the Air Force was doing an experimental test flight of a classified operation. So we're going to ask you to hand over all your film and cameras. And they say, no, we won't do it. And he says, well, in exchange for that, we will allow you off the plane. And we'll return them to you in a couple of weeks. That sort of thing. And you could see he's sort of like very slimy and over sort of like overly professional, as you know that he's lying. This sort of thing's really happened, by the way. It really, really has. Now, about the film. Now, of course, this has inspired lots of people. Paola Harris explained when she watched this. I mean, Paola came up in a previous video this actually inspired her to do what she did, and it is. I can understand that when you combine the visuals, John Williams' score. As I say, John Williams and Spielberg have a remarkable relationship, a remarkable double act in creating amazing scenes for movies. But you know, I said before I went to watch this that I would see something new in this, and I have. I have seen something new in it. In fact, it's amazing. This, of all the times I've seen this, hundreds of times, it feels almost like I'm watching it for the first time. Maybe because I'm doing this detailed review. And it begins. There's lots of scenes in this film. There's lots of shots in the film where you see headlights of cars, and they look like something in the sky, like a UFO. And there's several shots like that. And then it opens with one in Mexico during the sandstorm, where you see the Flight 19 planes. This is when you first see Lacombe and Laughlin, and they go to this desert in Mexico. Flight 19 disappeared in. It's actually one of the so-called Bermuda Triangle disappearances, where a number of aircraft from they disappeared in 1945. A couple of Navy aircraft out on a test mission. Flight 19, they disappeared, and the planes reappear in this desert, and they say, "Well, where are the pilots?" But the planes look brand new, like they haven't been touched, like they've just landed that very day. Really amazing. And then there's lots of other stories that sort of come together at the end, and for example, different characters in different scenes which are separated from each other, and they come together in the end. And one of them, of course, is Gillian and Barry. Gillian being a young single mother living in this house in the countryside, which is a real house, and for the exterior shots were all done in the garden of a real house, and that the residents were quite happy to let this film crew use it. Now, this is where I consider that possibly Disclosure Day is a sequel, because you see the same building or something very similar in the Disclosure Day trailers. I pointed this out in my review of the trailers. And indeed, at one point, both the interior and exterior of the houses in the trailers looks very much like Gillian and Barry's house, almost identical. Obviously, it's not a real house this time, because in one of from the trailers, in one scene you see a car crashing through the conservatory, which you can't do in a real house. So obviously, just a piece in Disclosure Day. It's obviously a piece of scenery. And now, J. Allen Hynek acted as a technical expert on this film, and you can see it because in many, many different ways. For example, the effects on electrical equipment you see from in the very first scene with Gillian and Barry, because the first time you know that something is strange going on is when Barry's toys switch on by themselves. In fact, there's another scene where you see a vacuum cleaner, a Hoover, like moving by itself, and Barry says, "Clean the place up." He's just a little sweet little kid. And then I didn't notice it the first time I saw it, but on the exterior scenes, when Gillian goes to look at, because Barry runs out of the house, Barry's never scared of the aliens, which is amazing. He's never scared of them. Gillian's scared for him, but even when he's been abducted, he's like laughing and joking about it. But in the first scene where Barry runs out of the house, his little boy, 3 years old, a little boy called Carrie was cast as Barry, and Gillian runs after him, looking for him, and you see stars moving in the sky, and they could be satellites, but of course they're not. I mean, you have to look. You don't see it at first because it's in the background. I never saw it at first. And then, of course, then another character comes together with the Gillian and Barry story, which is, of course, Roy Neary, the other main character. Roy is a working class guy, an electrician, who lives with his wife and 3 children, Toby, Brad, and Sylvia. They were all pre-teens. I think Sylvia's maybe a little bit older than Barry, and then there's Toby, the young boy, about 5, and there's Brad, who's like about 8 or 9. And Roy is like, you often wonder why certain people got these psionic messages from the aliens and others didn't, and it could be that this type of personality. Roy, what makes Roy interesting? I mean, he's a responsible, hardworking family man. I say a professional man, qualified electrician. In the very first scene where he's talking to his son and he's helping him with his homework, he says, "Well, I qualified, so I don't have to answer questions." So he's a skilled man. He's a skilled man, and like I say, he's a tradesman. So he's from what you call it. I don't know if they have this in America. What you call in Britain the skilled working class. Similar to my own background. And Roy, but he has this kind of childlike enthusiasm because he says, "You've got to see Pinocchio, or let's play goofy golf." He's quite fun loving, even though he's a man sort of in his mid-30s. He's quite fun loving. And then of course there's the electric effects. The presence of the UFO starts affecting the whole area, and there's a blackout, and he has to go out to try and fix it because he's an electrician. And that's when he has this his close encounter, which is really well done. I mean, earlier on in the scene, you see this car pull up behind him, and you see the headlights. And then later on, when suddenly the crickets stop chirping and everything goes quiet, and you see this what you think is a car pulling up behind him, and then it rises into the sky. Because these UFOs often they have like these two lights on them. Some of them, like the small flying saucer type UFOs, and it does look like car headlights, and there's like a little radiator kind of thing as well. And you think that's what it is because it looks almost exactly the same. It rises up into the air. Roy doesn't see it at first. It's amazing shot, that. And later on, I mean, when you see them at the end, these particular type of UFOs, because like there's big, small, there's different categories of UFOs. There's probably 3 different types of UFOs. There's the big mothership, of course. Then there's like the medium-sized one that may be 8 and 10 feet across, and there's little orbs. But the medium-sized one, they have what almost looks like a face on them. I don't know if you noticed this, because I'm sure you've all seen this. They have the headlight effect. When you see at the end, almost looks like they've got a face. It's really amazing, and that's deliberate. And again, this was all designed. They don't look like the spaceships of previous science fiction films. They're more lights than they are solid, even though they do have structure. And of course, there's other elements which, of course, are from real ufology. For example, the actinic burn. I mean, what happens is that Roy, of course, he looks out. When the light shines down on him from the craft above him, he looks out. And only half his face is actually illuminated by the light from the craft. It gives him this actinic burn, which is like a sunburn type thing. It's from exposure to radiation. There's also the magnetic effects. The post boxes rattling. These outdoor American-style post boxes were rattling backwards and forwards. The bell on the level crossing was going. And the magnetic effects as well. You see things moving around inside his cab, inside the cab of his truck. You see things flying around. That was actually done. They actually put him on this, like, the way they made this is they actually created like a little swing type effect, which looked like the interior of the cab, and they literally rotated him around like a fairground ride. That's how they did that. The air traffic control scene is really good, which is where you actually see there were 2 aircraft. And they encounter an unknown object, and there's this discussion between them, air traffic control. The old black guy who's kind of like handling most of the air traffic, who's handling this particular case, he's actually a real air traffic controller, not an actor. They actually got a real air traffic controller to do it, which is really pretty good. Originally he was like he was brought in for technical expertise, but Spielberg decided to cast him. Yeah, it's really it's a really good scene. Of course, at the end, he asked the pilots, "Do you want to report a UFO?" And they say no, because again, this is where a lot of pilots complain about this. This was brought up at the 2001 press conference where John Callahan, the head of the FAA accident investigation branch, said, pilots don't want to talk about this because they could be taken, they could be grounded and forced into medical care and things like that. And that's when you see what happens is Roy and Gillian meet each other for the first time, because it's really fun. It's strange. It's a strange atmosphere. The scene on the road where that road goes over the hill, because that's what the sky watchers are. Because there's a lot of people like who go out sky watching when the lights start appearing, which always happens during a UFO flap. And Barry's like standing in the middle of the road, and there's this man sort of whistling. He doesn't seem doesn't seem all that bothered or frightened of the fact that there's a little 3-year-old boy standing in the middle of the road. But then Roy comes over the hill and he sees the little boy, breaks in time. Gillian just grabs him and moves him out of the way, and that's how Gillian and Roy meet. Roy goes home and gets his family, and he takes them there, and you immediately realise that Ronnie and Roy are not that close as a couple. Ronnie, Terry Garr's character, she tries to get romantic with Roy, and Roy kisses her, but then he's looking, when he's kissing her, he's going like this. He's looking up at the stars because he can't stop thinking about anything except UFOs. And then of course their relationship is stretched to breaking point by what happens next. But then you find out then there's an interesting scene in the Gobi Desert, which is really interesting, in Mongolia, where the United Nations suddenly appear, which includes Lacombe and Laughlin, and you find the Cotopaxi. It's a ship. Now the ship actually sunk in 1925, yet they've taken the ship and they put it into the Bermuda Triangle mythology, which is very big in the 70s. Charles Berlich's book about the Bermuda Triangle. I mean, I don't think there's actually anything particularly odd about the Bermuda Triangle when you take into the statistics of how busy the sea is around there. But they're claiming, as with the Flight 19, that this was all the result of the aliens taking these vessels and taking these aircraft and this vessel, and then bringing them back. And they dumped the aircraft in Mexico. But then they dumped the ship in the middle of the Gobi Desert, which is about as far from sea as you can ever get. And you think, well, how did they do that? The United Nations seems to be quite heroic in this film. And, they seem to be behind the whole interaction, interaction between humanity and the extraterrestrials. And the role they play reminds me a little bit of World War Z. I don't know if you remember my review of World War Z. It was only a short video. I made it many years ago. It's zombie film called World War Z, which is not bad, actually. I did a review of it for Panama TV many years ago. I think it was my first roving review. And Ronnie, Veronica, Roy's wife, she unfortunately doesn't understand him. No one seems to understand him, and I know how that feels. I really do. I can kind of identify with Roy. I really can. And when the newspapers arrive, she starts cutting the stories out about UFOs. She starts censoring Roy's newspapers, so he can't read about the UFOs, which of course can't stop him. And it's about the same time that he exhibits more psionic symptoms, so that he starts making the strange shapes out of the shaving cream in his hand, which indicates he's having these telepathic psionic experiences. Now, these are never illustrated in the form of visions. You never see Roy's visions brought to life they're never depicted. All you know is that he's having these really weird experiences, and he's becoming more and more isolated from his family, especially his wife. Ronnie just thinks he's losing his mind. She's a very sort of conventional kind of woman. And he's finding this very, very distressful. And there's other things that happen. I mean, at the same time, Lacombe and Laughlin and the United Nations, they go to India. Then they're going all over the world to follow this UFO trail. And you see this huge crowd chanting the 5 tones, and there's an unforgettable scene, which I've actually put into the title shot of this video, where he asked them through an interpreter where these lights came from, where this strange object came from. They all put their point up at the sky. It's an amazing moment, and it's all done in close up with the people on the hill in the background. It reminds me of the Sermon on the Mount from the Bible. They're all chanting the 5 tones, and then when at the next Skywatch, it's Roy and Ronnie, and Roy goes there on his own without the family, because Ronnie won't go anywhere with him now, and meets Gillian and Barry. And you see the lights in the sky, but it turns out it's police helicopters, and they've come along and they've broken up the Skywatch. It seems sort of like it seems typical, actually, the government would do that, so that they won't even let people. You think, what harm is people standing on a hillside just looking up into the sky? But then you get the idea that there's this cover up. These police helicopters, like hovering really low on the downdraft on their rotors is just blowing everyone away. What's interesting, what I love about the visuals, and I mean Douglas Trumbull was the visual effects supervisor for this film, and Douglas Trumbull is he's well known in the sort of moon landing hoax scene, which I've discussed before with the late Marcus Allen and everyone else, and the Apollo detectives. Is that well, I won't go into details now, but he's supposedly involved in that. But I mean, you see, what's interesting is, and it must be deliberate, is whenever the lights of these craft are seen, you get lens flare around it, like halos from lens flare, and that's deliberately left in. It's a deliberate effect. It's really, really good. I love that. And there's another scene again with the UN where they're at the Goldstone radio telescope communicating with the they're sending these 5 tones out into space, and they say there are aliens 7 seconds. They say 7 light seconds away. So these aliens are already in the solar system. And it says they're in the ecliptic, just like 3i Atlas was. They're in the plane of the ecliptic. So the aliens are close. They're in the solar system, and they're communicating these 5 tones out to them, and they keep sending them numbers. And it's really it's an amusing thing because it's actually Laughlin then knows, because he says he used to be a map maker. He was a cartographer. He made maps, and he says these are like coordinates. And it's very I must say these aliens are very cooperative. They announce where they're going to be by sending us coordinates that we would know for our own map making. Now it could be that aliens wouldn't be that easy to communicate with aliens. As I said many times, I think that The Arrival is probably the best alien invasion movie ever made, because it's centered around the main theme of Arrival is language, and about the difficulty in communicating with aliens who really do arrive. And the aliens aren't these sweet little greys that wander around. They're these strange heptapods, these strange like squid-like beings, and they make black circles with like ink. And that's probably more realistic than them saying, "Oh, we're going to send you coordinates with numbers that you would recognize." But the nice cooperative aliens, and again, this is something more to do. This is something that makes the film feel a bit less sophisticated, quite frankly. It's funny because the UN people, like they start acting like Roy. They become childlike and full of fun. And there's this really amusing scene where they say, "We need a globe," because they're desperate to find out where these coordinates are, and they go and raid this office where there's this big decorative globe of the Earth, and they pull it off its mount and roll it along the floor. And then they start running their fingers along the latitudes and longitudes, and they realize they meet in Wyoming. We need a full detailed map of Wyoming. And there's something incredibly idealistic about this film. It's so it is ungrounded in a way. It's so positive to the point of being almost new age. It's almost as if the entire world has turned into like the Findhorn community or the Brahma Kumaris Center. Meanwhile, Barry and Gillian are still there. Gillian, and now Barry is having the same experiences in his own way as a little 3-year-old boy, because he keeps banging out the 5 tones on his little xylophone. And then there's the abduction scene. Now, this is the scariest part of the movie, where Barry is abducted. He's pulled out through the cat flap by the aliens, and Gillian tries to stop him but can't. And it's a bit like The Birds. So she shuts all the windows and doors, and Barry's just laughing. He's not scared. He wants to go out and speak to the aliens, and she's like she's terrified and screaming. And the aliens keep trying to get in. There's red lights outside, and eventually they come out through like this little grating in the floor, and the screws unscrew and things like that. It's just like Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. And of course, Gillian is distraught when Barry's taken. And they go to a meeting, and there's these US Air Force debunkers. One of them says, "Oh, this is a photo of an alien. That's what you saw." He said, "Yeah." He says, "I made that. My kids threw this plate in the air, and I photographed it." And Gillian is in the newspapers making claims. Now, one thing's not very realistic, I think, and again, it signifies the kind of maybe over positivity of this film, is that she's never a suspect in Barry's disappearance, when in reality she would be in custody, because just look at it from the police's point of view. She reports her kid missing. She's the only one who saw him go missing, and things like that. But she's allowed to wander free, and the police just ask her were there any strangers in the neighborhood. They drag the river, things like that. So she's questioned by the police, but then she's just let go. Obviously, they wouldn't believe her story about alien abduction, because when Travis Walton was abducted, his mate said the same thing, and the police didn't believe him. The police, for until Travis turned up alive, the police suspected his mates of killing him. They were murder suspects, and Gillian would have been too. And it's just after that you see the jumpsuited people at this secret base where they're planning this meeting, and the jumpsuit guys, they all have like sunglasses and they have these red jumpsuits, and there's like a triangle symbol on them, which I think signifies this organization, this kind of like ATIP type organization in the UN or whatever it is that contacts the aliens. And they also have the stars and stripes, and there's the French tricolor. These flags are always flying at every event. Like in the final scene, you see the stars and stripes and the French tricolor, because I suppose maybe that's something to do with Lacombe being a French guy. Funny thing about Lacombe, wherever he goes, Laughlin goes with him and acts as his interpreter, because Laughlin is a French interpreter. But Lacombe can't speak English, and there's many scenes where he speaks English to the extent where you know that he can speak it pretty well. Francois Truffaut, the actor, learned a bit of English so he could play that role. So, funny enough, Lacombe, Truffaut was actually only Alain Delon was originally going to play him, and then there's Lino Ventura, a couple of other French actors were considered before Spielberg settled on Truffaut. What's interesting, what I find is interesting, is that Spielberg specifically wanted to base the character on Jacques Vallée, who was back in those days he was a very big name in the UFO world. Go away. And it's funny because there's little amusing little scenes in this film. I mean, Spielberg has a sense of humor. He can tug on the old heartstrings, but he has a sense of humor. And when the jumpsuits are boarding this coach to go to the location, and you don't know what it's for, then the coach driver is like this Air Force guy, and he just looks at them curiously. He probably hasn't been told what it's all about. Doesn't have a need to know. And there's this sinister old guy with white hair as well, who's you get the feeling he's a bad guy. It turns out he's not. And they start planning cover-ups, and you hear them. You don't know exactly what it's for yet, but you hear them talking about, well, should it be a flood? Should we say a flood or a disease? What about the people who always think they're immune and stuff like that? And then Roy is still experiencing these strange episodes where he makes a sculpture again out of mashed potato, and you don't know at the time what it's all about. And then Brad starts crying, and Roy cries. He says, "I'm still your dad. I'm still dad." But then he has a shower. He goes in the shower and washes himself fully clothed, and there's a big row, and Ronnie loses her rag, and he asks Ronnie to hug him, and she says no, and she won't do it, and she says she hates him. Oh, Christ, this is awful. The next morning, Roy decides to suppress his interest, but then, of course, that's the moment when he starts ripping down all the UFO posters he's got on his wall. Ronnie, I'm back to normal now. Then, of course, he's making this clay model, and he sees that it's like looks exactly like Devil's Tower, and he starts he makes a model out of a dustbin and a load of earth, which he digs in for the gun. At that point, Ronnie walks off and leaves him, and she takes the kids away to her sister's house, and poor Roy's just left destitute. There's this quite long scene where it's all quiet, and there's just like the sound of people going about their everyday business while Roy's wandering around his empty house with this strange earth and rubbish and dustbin sculpture he's built in the middle of the lounge. At one point, he says to Ronnie, "You know, if I don't do this, I'll need a doctor." Because she says, "Ronnie, you need to go and see a doctor." He says, "If I don't do this, I'll need a doctor." And then you see the Devil's Tower appear on the TV screen because there's this story, there's this cover story, and I'm going, "Look behind you, look behind you." And Roy sort of eventually he's got his back to it, the TV, and you keep seeing this. There's great suspense actually because you keep seeing this picture of the Devil's Tower, and you realise that's what it is. And I go, "Look behind you." I do this every time I watch it. "Look behind you, Roy." And eventually he does. It all looks normal because like there's the Budweiser add-on, and then that gives way to a news story where the news reporter is saying very, very in a very sober tones. He's saying, "Oh, there's a very controversial shipment of military poison, military nerve gas has leaked. And for the reason we have to evacuate 300 square miles around the Devil's Tower." And you realize that's the cover story. It reminds me a little bit. I mean, the way that this fake news story emerges on TV just after an advert, it's stylistically, it's very similar to my. Do you remember the video? It's one of my favorite videos I've ever done, actually. The UFO disclosure here. British Prime Minister makes an announcement. There's Boris Johnson making an announcement. Do you remember that video? I did it for New Year a couple of years ago. And then at the end, there's that advert for my books. Yeah. But of course, Roy realizes, and there's many other people. You find out there's 12 people who actually go there, and it's the fact that there's 12 is some people have made a big deal out of. But of course, Roy and Gillian realize. They see the picture of Devil's Tower. They realize that's what the aliens are doing. The aliens are inviting them to this meeting along with the UN and the team from the UN. They're also inviting these people. They consider them the right kinds of people, and so they go towards the danger zone. Everyone's trying to get out. Everyone else is trying to get out of there. There's overloaded trains with people sitting on roofs, and there's like this bloke selling canaries in cages. But they're actually pigeons because they're the only ones he could catch. And he's selling gas masks. He even got one in his dog. It looks really funny. And Roy and Gillian then trying to get back into the zone when everyone's trying to leave, and they keep getting stopped at roadblocks. They go cross country in the end. But they feel some uncertainty about the cover story because you see the unconscious cows and horses and sheep and everything all on the farms. And it turns out they have got gas masks and they put them on just in case they're wrong. Indeed, at one point, the viewer might think there's some uncertainty in the viewer as well, because at one point, they're stopped eventually by the military, who are all wearing hazmat suits, and because at the moment Gillian's got a pigeon in a cage, and one of them shows them the pigeon apparently dead in the cage. This is after they've been captured. But then you realize there's so much more going on, because they're questioned by Lacombe and Laughlin, and you realize that Lacombe is actually kind of on their side. He's not just saying, he's not doing the bureaucratic thing. He asks him, have you had these thoughts and feelings? And he's actually interested in the visions that people are having. Lacombe is, like Jacques Vallée, Lacombe is he's actually interested in the UFO subject. He's not there to be part of any cover-up. And then he's told, Roy and Gillian are told they have to go, so they're loaded aboard a helicopter with 10 other people. There are 12 in the helicopter. 12 people turn up. Some people made a big deal about that. But when they're in a helicopter, they all exchange looks, and they realize they're kindred spirits. And they realize that they are the people who've been summoned together, and they look at each other, and there's some old people, there's some young people, there's some men and women, but they look at each other, and it's an amazing scene. They're all got gas masks on. Some of them even believe the military, and Roy's trying to persuade them, look, there's no real gas. He takes his own gas mask off. But some of them are some of the old people are saying, yeah, but it's still the army's business. It's none of ours. We should just let them go. But of course, then Roy, Gillian, and one other man called Larry escape from the helicopter. Now, what's interesting is there's a guy called Mark Brahman who's written a book about Spielberg. And he makes a big deal out of this, and he brings many other really interesting things to bear. And I know Ellis Taylor would be interested in this, or anyone else who's into like synchro mysticism and symbolism would be interested in this. There were 12 people on the helicopter, and they're on some kind of spiritual journey. Obviously, it's some kind of it's some kind of big. They're on some quest, some spiritual quest. This is essentially what they're doing. There is a spiritual message in this film. The aliens are kind of communicating them because they're kind of kindred spirits. And in a sense, it's as if they're there because they don't fit into humanity. What you know about, well, Roy in particular, we know is an unusual kind of personality. He's someone, I mean, I can identify with him. I really can. But Mark Brahman, in his book, I've not actually read the book, but I've heard interviews with Mark Brahman. He says that Spielberg has included symbolism in terms of numerology and things like this, which related to the Kabbalah. Because and I don't know the details, that the fact there are 12 people who turn up, and then 3 people actually escape from the helicopter, and of course only 2 of them actually make it to the actual landing site, is Kabbalistic apparently. Now, is this deliberate on Spielberg's part? I mean, how much does Spielberg know about this? I don't know much about Spielberg's background. I know from his background, I know he's Jewish. But I don't know how orthodox his family is, because, I mean, to be a Jew is one thing, it's an identity, but there's so many different beliefs within Judaism and within the Jewish community that, you know, there's that old joke about if Robinson Crusoe had been a Jew, he would have built 2 synagogues on his island, one to worship in and one to refuse to worship in. You know, it's like they're so divided about their beliefs, and they love theological debates for that reason. But what Brahman is saying is that this is Kabbalist, that some Spielberg may have come from a very orthodox background, and he's included Kabbalistic symbolism in this film. And indeed, Brahman actually talks about some of Spielberg's other films that have similar symbolism in. I don't know that much. I don't know, to be honest. But I know that these ideas have come into popular science fiction culture. For example, in Star Trek, Mr. Spock does this, doesn't he? Live long and prosper. Right, that's the Vulcan greeting. Do you know where that comes from? That was originally ad-libbed by the actor Leonard Nimoy. It was not actually scripted, and then they decided to adopt it for the series and Mr. Spock's character. Now, Leonard Nimoy comes from a very orthodox Jewish background in New York City, and he actually sneaked into the synagogue one day when there was like a secret meeting of the rabbis, and he witnessed what could be some kind of occult ritual in a Kabbalistic sense, and he saw the rabbis doing that, and he decided. This is when he was a little kid. He just sneaked in and hid there and peeked out. Yeah, and so it could be this. I mean, I don't know whether Spielberg is that involved, or if he's included these things consciously or subconsciously. Maybe this is something he learned when he was when his parents taught him, or maybe it's something he learned at the synagogue, or maybe he went to a Jewish school. I don't know, but maybe he learned these things, and he's included them subconsciously, not necessarily deliberately. But that's just one aspect that I remember very, very well from Brahman's interviews. And again, a lot of what Spielberg does, I think, might be subconscious. Like some people, like Ronald Reagan, actually announced when he watched Close Encounters, especially this scene at the end, which you see behind me, how real it was. He says, "Do you know how real this is, Stephen? Do you know what you're looking at is so real?" There's only a handful of people in this room who know how real this is. Did Spielberg have insider knowledge, or did he pick something up morphic? Did he pick something up out of the Jungian collective unconscious, as artistic people often do? They often do. And maybe that's how he know. It's not something deliberate. It's how he learned about it. Maybe I'll know more when I see Disclosure Day. I'll look out for these themes when I'm in Disclosure Day. Definitely. So Roy takes the mask off to demonstrate there's no poison gas. And then the 12 people on the helicopter are split between those who want to make a run for it and those who just want to be flown out of the area. Only 3 of the people only 3 people actually make a run for it. Roy, Gillian, and this other guy, Larry. They escape, and they do a runner. Now, what's interesting is that's where you learn a little bit more about Lacombe, because Lacombe is looking out of a window in the hut next to the helipad, and he sees them run off. And he doesn't say, "Oi, look, they're escaping, go get them." He doesn't say that. It's like he's on their side. You get the feeling he's kind of on their side. And there's this guy, Major Walsh, the military officer who's running the operation. He finds out about it, but we never find out if Lacombe actually alerts Walsh to the fact that three people have escaped from the helicopter and they're in the area. Because Lacombe is kind of like a really sort of, he's like Roy. He's like this. He's this very sort of like enthusiastic kind of man. And then of course they send up the helicopters after them. They send the military out to try and find the 3 of them. They do a search up the hillside, the side of the mountain. And then they pull them out and they say, "We're going to dust the area." And you wonder what they're talking about. They're actually going to drop this sleeping gas, which they use, the same they used on the livestock, onto the mountain to try and just to sleep. And they say, "We're going to knock them out. They'll sleep for about 6 hours and wake up with a headache, but apart from that, they'll be fine." And again, this is another part of how this is so idealistic. This is another aspect of how almost sweet and innocent and almost like treacly this film is. I mean, not that I'm against that, but it's such a, it has a kind of like, it has a kind of like almost lovable nature to it, this film. You know, no one's really bad. There's no real bad guys in this film. There's no real evil ones. You know, the closer you get to all bad guys, are like the people running the security for the operation, and even they, they go, we'll drop sleeping gas on them, and they'll be knocked out for a few hours, But I mean, of course, we're going to get tough with these people. We're going to drop gas on them, and they're going to sleep. You may think it's extreme, but we're going to drop sleeping gas all over the mountain, and they're going to go to sleep. But of course, this is so unrealistic, because if something like that really happened, aliens were landing and the government was going to, or the United Nations or whatever government was going to go and meet with them at a secret location, and they had to have a cover story to get people out, and some people turned up anyway. What would really happen if some people managed to break into this compound and threaten the security of the operation? Indeed, they do, because as you'll find out later, you find out later in the film, there is some independent evidence gathering, shall we say. Unfortunately, the answer is they wouldn't use sleeping gas. They'd probably use deadly nerve gas, or they would just shoot these people. That's what would really happen in that situation, which is another, of course, that's another reason why the film is so benevolent, because it portrays the entire scenario of the film is just so positive. It's idealistic. It's incredibly idealistic. Indeed, Spielberg said in this interview on the bonus disc, which he actually said that he couldn't make that film now because he said he'd lost his interest in UFOs, and also he was a bit more jaded as he got older. He felt more jaded because he was a young man when he made this film in '77. Funny enough, something obviously rekindled his interest, didn't it? I'm curious to know exactly what rekindled Spielberg's interest since 1997, which is why he went on to make Disclosure Day. I don't include War of the Worlds as a UFO film. It's not. It's an alien invasion film. It's not a UFO film. And then, pardon me. But then, of course, you know that Roy and Gillian do make it. They make it to the edge of the landing area. This is all. The landing area was all filmed in a warehouse, and apparently it's incredibly hot in there. But you wouldn't know it because they wipe the sweat off them between takes and things like that. But it looks like this area, and it's got like a matte background behind it, and it's very realistic. It's good special effects, and you see like there's floodlights, and there's huts, and there's a landing strip, and everything's set up, and there's the laboratory, and there's the synthesizer for playing the music. Because these aliens have it's an amazing idea. They use music as language. It's amazing. And the announcer's like going testing, 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 giving a lot of really a lot of technical stuff. And he says, ladies, gentlemen, please take your places. I don't think we can imagine a more beautiful night. You see, first he orders the lights to be reduced by 60%. And then he says, I don't imagine we could imagine a more beautiful night. Watch the skies. He gets all poetic. And Watch the Skies was the working title for the movie. And what follows next, of course, is this amazing scene. And it's like these people are there almost because like they're different people to everyone else. And I get the feeling that it's almost like they're entering like another world there. It's almost like another world which is so different to the outside. And it's amazing. It's one of the most incredible scenes I've ever seen. The last 20 minutes of this film are cinematic wonder. And it's almost theatric. I can't believe it's making me feel emotional because after watching this film so many times, I've never felt this. Never felt this kind of emotional about it. Maybe because I'm doing a review of it, but it begins every time these objects appear, and it's an amazing scene. There's groundbreaking special effects in this, where they vision mix the alien spacecraft, and you have like a camera on a dolly that's moving. That's never been done before, and then everyone cheers at the end when these craft with like little faces on, with the lights that look like faces as well as headlights. They come down, those little small saucers, and then you think that's the end of it, and they're all cheering and clapping and congratulating each other. You think it's the end of it, but then you see, this often happens every time you think it's all over. More happens, something else happens, and you get like a clue beforehand because you can hear like in the background you can hear radio chatter, and you can hear just when they're all like, you think that's the end of it, and something's happened. You hear we're picking up more contacts, multiple contacts, large contacts. There's a large. We're picking up a large object just approaching, and you know something more is going to happen. It's just like a little hint that's given to you. It's incredibly well done. It's almost like stage left, stage right. Never seen anything like it. And then after the three saucers depart, a whole load of different orbs and different shaped craft, hundreds of them, fly through they fly out. You hear this thunder and these clouds, and then these multiple craft like come out of these clouds, hundreds of them, all different shapes and sizes, and the little red orbs, they come out as well. And it's funny because like there's this scene where there's this bloke, like he's the guy operating the cameras. There's a whole row of different cameras taking shots, and there's like these movie motion cameras as well. And he pulls out this little portable Polaroid, and he takes a little quiet shot and puts it back in his pocket. And Gillian does the same. She's got a little portable camera as well. I don't know whether they were allowed to keep. We never find out exactly what happened to those photos. Maybe in the disclosure day it'll all come out, if it is a sequel. But it's Gillian also takes some photographs. She never comes down actually into the actual arena until she sees Barry, until just before the mothership arrives and Barry comes out. But you think it's the end because like some things happen. You think that's the end of one particular storyline, and then something else that happens that kind of brings it back together, brings the two things back together. It reminds me of the string quartet on the Titanic. They're playing a music, and then they say, in that really, really sad scene when the ship's going down and people are going to die, and then they're playing the string quartet and they're playing their music, and then they say, we better get into a lifeboat now, and they all walk off. They slowly come back and they start playing again. It's like that. It's not sad, obviously, but it's. And then something happens which I'm not sure whether to make of it. Roy says he's going to go down there. He's going to go down, and Gillian says no, she's not going to because Barry's not there. Not yet, but he hasn't been returned, and she thinks he's not going to be returned. And then Roy and Gillian exchange a passionate kiss. There's no hint beforehand that they're in any kind of relationship. Now we know that Ronnie's rushed off. We don't know that Roy and Ronnie are actually divorcing or anything. I mean, in fact, Roy is on the phone to Ronnie when he's back, he's home just before he leaves, when the news story comes on about the cover story. But they exchange a lover's kiss, and then he runs down into the arena while Gillian stays behind, and there's this very long, there's about a couple of minutes of stillness and silence, and again you think, is that the end of it? And that's when the mothership appears, this huge craft, a huge, like, double saucer-shaped, donut-shaped craft, or burger-shaped craft, with lots of aerials and antennas sticking out of it, and like glowing crystalline structures on one side of it. It's amazing, and it rumbles very, very lowly as it flies, and it's quite funny, actually, because there's humor in this. As Roy approaches the arena, this man runs past him and almost crashes into him, and you wonder what he's doing. You find he's running into the toilets. They've got these porta potties there, and he's running into them, and all the people start putting their sunglasses on. The calm Laughlin, all the people, they put their sunglasses on because of the light, and you hear this warning for low gravity and static charge. And again, that again is from people. Spielberg knew what was going on. He knew about ufology. He knew about ufology because he'd studied with Hynek. There's so much knowledge in this. Spielberg did his homework. He really, really did his homework. With the low, he says the fact that when this mothership comes down, which obviously is anti-gravity, it's controlled by an anti-gravity drive, and he says, as you approach those who have certain roles and regulations, some have to stand behind the double yellow lines as if it's parking, and others must move forward. Beware of static charge and low gravity. Again, this is what happens with real UFO encounters. And then they try to communicate with the guy with the synthesizer. And first they play the 5 tones, and this mothership answers back with 5 tones so loudly it breaks some of the windows. And then they're like just playing random tunes at each other, and you wonder what they're saying to each other. It's interesting that the aliens have this music. They have music as a language, and you can even recognize the instruments. So the synth is actually playing like clarinet music or oboe or something like that, and there's a very low bass tones and low pitch tones coming out of the mothership, which sounds like a tuba, on the big brass instrument. Although real aliens, of course, wouldn't have instruments like ours. And then again, you think, well, and again, there's another moment when you think that's the end of it. But then the ramp comes down, the big platform lowers. And that's when the returnees come out, including the Flight 19 pilots. And they come out looking rather confused, still in their uniforms and their flight jackets. And someone comes up and introduces themselves, and the comm introduces themselves, and they say what their names are. And this is the point where Hynek appears. J. Allen Hynek moves forward through the crowd, and he has his famous cameo. And and they say, and they've got like a checklist of photos, and they put black tape over them when they appeared. So they obviously, this return is kind of like planned. They've negotiated the aliens return the people they've abducted. And again, you don't get the feeling though that the aliens are bad, even though they've done this, even though they've just taken people and they've just kept them for many, many years. And then one of the people there makes the note that and says quite distinctly, it says they haven't aged. They're the same age they were when they disappear. And one of them quips, Albert Einstein was right about special relativity, time moving at different rates. And the other guy says Einstein was probably one of them. But it's true, they're the same age they were. The Flight 19 pilots are the same age as they were when they disappeared in 1945. And one of them says, come over here for debriefing. And there's going to be an awful lot to explain to those guys. I mean, how are they going to readjust after being away for 32 years and not aging and coming back to a world that is totally different to what it was in terms of culture and technology as in 1945? And their own children are probably older than them. Yeah, it's that would be a bit of a shock, wouldn't it? And then Barry, you see this little figure running out, and it's Barry. And Gillian, of course, runs forward, delighted to see him again, and he's of course happy. And it's like it's when they do the returnees, and then no, it's what's ironic here, and it's unavoidable, is that unlike the pilots of Flight 19, Barry has visibly aged. And of course, because he's a little boy, he was 3 years old when the shooting began. He'd aged about a year by the time they shot that scene, the final scene. And they couldn't just get another actor because he's just too distinctive. So there's too many close-ups of him. So they just had to bring Barry in, and just you had to suspend your disbelief. But he's probably about 6 inches taller than he was at the beginning of the film, because they just had to do these shots at different times. So Barry has aged. In fact, he's aged much more than he would have normally, considering in terms of the timeline of the movie, he was only abducted for maybe a week or two. Again, that's unavoidable. It's unavoidable. But Barry, and then Barry's like, and then the ramp goes up, and Barry says bye, and he smiles and says bye bye. And again, you think that's the end of it. You think there's so much suspense, there's so much wonder, and there's so many wonderful surprises in this scene. It's incredible. And then the ramp comes down again. You see, it's so easy when I'm watching this, almost to lose my sense of reality. It's so absorbing. And that's when the aliens appear. There are 3 types of aliens. The first one appears as this big sort of insectoid, almost. It's very, very small body and huge, long, thin limbs. And it like raises its arms up like that. And of course, this is all mixed with John Williams' score, and it's so well done. At one point, several times actually, especially when at the end, when all the red jumpsuits are going on board, it segs into "When You Wish Upon a Star," and that's kind of like it's symbolic of the kind of fantastical nature of this entire film. It's so well done. But then the little greys then appear, and they run around, and they sort of say hello, and then but Roy gets led away at that point, because like Lacombe and the others are talking about it, and they realize that Roy has been sent there because he has to join the red jumpsuits. And you realize the red jumpsuits at that point, aren't being they're there to go onto the spaceship. It's an exchange. The details are never actually finalized, but you realize it's some kind of exchange, which is that somehow the aliens are returning these people, like the pilots and things. And after the pilots, many, many more people come out, probably about 100 people come out, some with very old-fashioned type clothing, as if they've been kept for a long time. And Roy's, for reasons it's not quite clear, Roy's joining the red jumpsuits. And they get led into a chapel, and there's a service, and there's a vicar, and there's a priest there, and he asks them to pray, and he prays for all these red jumpsuit guys. And then they all go out with Roy, and they board the craft. And Spielberg actually said at the time that he wished he hadn't done that, because it doesn't quite fit with Roy's character. It doesn't quite fit because Roy, of course, is leaving behind. We don't know exactly whether he has how bad the split is with his wife, but he's got 3 kids. And at the time Spielberg did the film, he hadn't actually had any children, but since then he did have children when he was married to Amy Irving, and that's made him think that in that situation that Roy actually wouldn't have done that. He would have stayed because of his kids. Indeed, I would, with my child. But it's like. And along with the music and the looks and the acting and the looks on people's faces, it's just so it's just such an incredibly powerful moment. And it's like, and some of them are thinking, and indeed this is how I feel like I can get inside Roy's head, that when they're looking at these aliens, and not just Roy, but a lot of them are thinking, maybe I've got more in common with you than I do with my fellow humans. And I sometimes feel like that. I feel like I'm an alien myself too. I feel like that. I feel like I'm a kind of alien. And what would I do? Would Would I be tempted to put on the red jumpsuit myself if I was there? Yeah, I'd be tempted. I'd be very tempted to leave the world behind and go up into the stars. I would. I can understand why Paola Harris was so inspired by this film, that everything she's done since then is because she saw this film, and she says that this is what really kind of brought her around to this way of thinking. And I really can understand that. I do wonder whether the ET story is connected to that or not, whether the story of ET the extraterrestrial is connected, because the ET alien you see in that film, the film he made after this one, again, which is another UFO alien themed film, is different. You don't see that species of creature on the spaceship. Although in this particular movie, you see 3 types of aliens, and the funny thing about that is that Brian Dunning, the presenter of the Skeptoid podcast, yes, that's what you get. You pick up these things up if you start studying the skeptic movement. These are the things you pick up. Brian Dunning of the Skeptoid podcast, he claims that nobody ever saw grey aliens before 1977. He said that the whole grey aliens that you see in the movie, they created the whole mythology of the grey, and that everyone who's had abduction experiences since, the reason they see the grey aliens is because they are tapping in to the cultural symbol that was created by this film. That's Brian Dunning of the Skeptoid podcast. Yeah. Now, funny thing is, Robbie Graham, the ufologist, British ufologist, who sadly died at a young age. I think he was 41 or 42 when he died, which is very, very sad. He contacted the production, a guy called Avis, I think, the production designer of this film, and he asked him. He said, "Look, where did you get the idea for those grey aliens?" Because Robbie wanted to get to the bottom of this, and he actually mentions this in his book Silver Screen Saucers. And the production designer said, "Oh, it's very simple." He said, Hynek was helping with the research project, and we talked to many people who study UFOs, and they put us in touch with some people who see them, the abductees. And I had long conversations with them, and they described the aliens to me, and that's how I modeled them in the film. So what's happened is that Brian Dunning has put the cart before the horse here. People don't see grey aliens because they were in Close Encounters. The grey aliens appear in Close Encounters because real people see them, and so Close Encounters is based on real life, on real aliens and UFOs, not the other way around. So Brian Dunning either deliberately or accidentally or misunderstood or lied. Interesting, isn't it? That's an interesting thought, isn't it? And then there's that final shot of Roy looking back and smiling, and there's Gillian who's looking tearful and waving to him. And then again, Barry for a second time says bye, as all the jumpsuits go on board the spaceship along with Roy, and Roy's looking back. There's a light behind him. It's an amazing final shot, and I agree with Spielberg. That should have been the end of it. No one should see inside the spaceship. And then the ramp goes up, and then the mothership takes off, and that's the end of the film. And there's so much left unanswered. I mean, I don't want to see inside the spaceship. I know, I don't want to see that either. But there's so much left unanswered in this film. So much. Which is, why did it happen? How did it happen? What was the actual agreement between humans and aliens? Because it appears to be some kind of exchange. It's not explained, but it seems like they returned the people they'd abducted, these hundreds of people, in exchange for the red jumpsuits. And some people say this is like the Planet Serpo story that Bill Ryan used to talk about, because that's actually what happened. I mean, I don't know how Dan Burrish used to mention this as well. I don't know if that's true specifically, but whether it's true or not, there's no real there's no real resolution in the story. It ends at that point where you get the feeling that maybe it ends prematurely, and there should be some kind of postscript or some kind of epilogue to the film. So we don't know exactly why the aliens contacted humans, what they really want. What kind of beings are they? Are they good or bad? I mean, taking people from airplanes in 1945 and is not necessarily good. Taking a little boy from his mother, again, why did they abduct Barry? Why did they abduct all these other people? There's no explanation. And of course, there's no resolution in terms of disclosure either. I mean, this is why maybe Disclosure Day is a sequel, because all that happens at the end, there's this secret meeting where they've cleared the area out. They put out a fake story about a poison gas spill. And then most people believe it, and most people just stay out. That they leave the area. You see huge crowds of people bundling onto trains, overloaded trains, things like that, putting masks over the face, almost like the old C word pandemic. It's reminiscent of that. And then and they're trying to escape, and so those people believe it. There's no reason, apart from those few people who actually are drawn towards the area because they have these visions that Roy and Gillian have. Apart from those people, everyone else just believes it. And what's going to happen next is, as far as the world in general is concerned, is that the word's going to go out. Oh, we've cleaned up the gas spill, and you can all go home now. And no one will ever know that anything happened, because they'll clear away the soundstage, they'll clear away the base and the landing strip, and that's the end of it. And then all the aliens will have gone. That's the end of the secret meeting, and no one will ever know about it, except maybe the secret photographs that Gillian took and the other man. See, again, we don't know what happened to them. We don't know what happened. I mean, when Gillian was leaving, we don't know how they actually left the area, because Gillian would have had to leave with all the others. Was she searched for her camera? Was that other guy who was running the cameras, and he took a couple little Polaroids himself? Again, this is left unanswered in the movie. It ends at that point. And by then it was like 2 hours, 20 minutes long. So you could explain, maybe it couldn't go on for much longer because of simple duration, but maybe it will be answered in Disclosure Day. I don't know. Either way, I feel that by reviewing this film I've seen so many times, but somehow I feel I've seen it differently. I've actually just seen something that I've seen so many times, but I feel like I've just watched it for the first time. Maybe because I'm doing this review. That's how it feels to me right now. Or maybe I'm a different person since I last watched this movie. Either way, Disclosure Day is coming up, and I feel I'm ready to watch that now. And I think doing this review and watching this movie again, especially in the context of making it a Hapanlo TV review. I wasn't going to make it a Hapanlo TV review. I was just going to watch it privately, and I thought, why don't I invite you viewers? You viewers can come along with me on this ride, and I'll do a full review and put it on Hapanlo TV. I just maybe that's what I needed to go through so I can prepare myself for watching Disclosure Day. What Disclosure Day will be like, I don't know. We'll find out pretty soon. And as soon as I find out, you, the viewers, you'll find out too, because I will tell you. Thank you for watching Hapanlo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.